Well, listeners, in case you didn't get enough sports today, here's an ad break that'll tell you how to watch even more sports. YouTube is the new home of NFL Sunday Ticket. And if you sign up now, you'll get our lowest full season price of the year. Just go to youtube.com/presale to get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket. Watch your favorite teams out-of-market Sunday afternoon games, exclusively on YouTube and YouTube TV. All right, enough about sports. Go get more sports. Terms and embargoes apply. Offer ends June 6th. No refunds.
NIL Now with Lauren Sisler and Kevin Jones.
If you want to learn more about name, image, and likeness, you need to go to The Source. The NIL Now podcast from Headline Studio and Reddit highlights the biggest storylines with comments from key guests in the college and high school NIL space.
NIL is not a cherry on top. It needs to be thought about as a part of these young men and women's future to, further their careers. You should be able to leave college with something.
Subscribe to NIL Now on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome in Rose City to the Soccer Made in Portland podcast. Your two hosts, Ryan Clark and Chris Reifer, met each other in real life for the very first time yesterday, Wednesday, at the U.S. Open Cup match. He was taller than I expected. It's an unbelievable moment for the pod, and as Bill Oram noted to us via text message, a sign of the times. He was a bit dismayed by the fact,
that's right,
Chris, that we had not met yet.
Hey man, I work remotely, so
we all do.
That's just how it goes. 2023. No, but nice to go from internet friends to real friends while we talk to all of our other internet friends here on the podcast. At some point, and I'm just saying this live to make us committed. We will have to do a live taping, a live recording of the podcast. But that's down the road.
That would be fun. I would love to do it somewhere where fans are hanging out. They can be part of the experience, maybe over at like the Sports Bra for a Thorns game that's out on the road.
There's a phenomenal idea right there.
Yeah, they're putting it out in the universe, and maybe I can do the work of actually setting this type of thing up.
That's right.
That would be awesome.
Don't look to me for any of that because, as I said, I work remotely. So. Oh
no, you work remotely and you're a very busy man. So I would never propose such a.
But I will come.
Good. I'm glad you'll be there. We'll get to that game and the other Timbers game later on in the podcast, but we're going to start with the Thorns. They pulled out a 2-0 victory against the Racing Louisville. Sorry, I'm getting all my games mixed up here.
It's not hard to, given that you have two teams in three different competitions over the last 5 days. So
yeah, and half that time I was just like sick and like delirious, and I get back from Vegas and I've lost all my money, and I come back with like an upper respiratory disease.
I chose a terrible time to meet you in person. I should have given you like 2 more weeks to get rid of whatever Vegas gave you. And
I'm fine now, thankfully.
I'm just worried that the taint of Vegas just like lingers for a while.
I did feel a little greasy yesterday, so that's probably
it lingers. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't want to interact with too many people. No, that match for the Thorns though on Saturday was imperfect. It was very much, as you said off air, like a team that had played 3 games in about 8 days.
Yep.
But the Thorns were the better team. They had the far greater volume of chances. Christine Sinclair obviously starting things out early on. Her 60th career goal. She at that moment became the second player in NWSL history after Sam Kerr to get to 60. A few minutes later, over in Gotham, Lynn Williams became the third. So that was an exciting moment for 2 veterans. And stoppage time in the first half, Morgan Weaver scores the second, and the rest of the game just kind of played out how it played out. And the Thorns, got the result they wanted, but, weren't perfect, aren't necessarily in their best form right now, but an opportunity to kind of get back on that train and continue earning 3 points each week with this match on Saturday coming up against Angel City. So, your takeaways from that Thorns match, Chris?
I think that was really it. I mean, they looked every bit as haggard as you would expect them to be, given that they not only had sort of a 3-game and an 8-day turnaround, which is challenging in its own right, but that was also coming off an international break in which a bunch of their players played a fair amount and or traveled a fair amount. And so, I think you always looked at this game against Louisville as one that was going to be more just about points than it was going to be about aesthetics. And it is a literal win in that column of points over aesthetics. There were definitely some points in the game in which the Thorns were uncharacteristically sloppy. Frankly, even though the prior two games in this window were a draw and a loss, I think the Thorns played better in each of those prior two games than they did against Louisville. But I also think it's eminently understandable why that is. And so I think the fact that you have a Thorns team that has so many weapons, that really helps them get through these moments. They're not just dependent on one player, although Sophia Smith remains transcendent. They're not just dependent on Smith to do everything for them. They have a lot of players who can score goals. So they have a lot of players who can make plays. And I think that's what you need to fall back on in these moments in which not everything is going to be firing on all cylinders. And so I came away, first of all, just good to get the points because they'd left some results on the table earlier in this window that I think had been pretty frustrating. And you definitely don't want to sort of compound that with another game in which you're dropping results, even though the underlying performance would have merited a win. And it did merit a win against Louisville. The Thorns were just better. But it's nice to get the points so that they can remain at the top of the table, which is where they are, just ahead of both the Reign, the Wave, and Gotham, who must be closing in on their points total from last year with 9 points already through 4 games. Gotham really besting their lowly 2022 performance. But they stay at the top of the table, which based on how they've played is right where they belong. But it's also fair to say that the Thorns have maybe been a little bit of flat track heroes so far. They've played a number of teams that are generally and not just generally, literally in the bottom half of the table. And so there is definitely work still to be done for the Thorns. They're going to have to prove themselves against better teams. But when you look at the team, when you look at the way they're playing, when you look at the ease with which they're dispatching these lesser opponents, I don't think there's a whole lot in general to worry about. Interesting game coming up this next weekend with Angel City here at home in Portland. Angel City is a team that I think a lot of folks expected to be in that upper echelon in building on year one into year two. It has not worked out that way so far. It's been a little bit of a sophomore slump for Angel City, but the recent signing of Julie Ertz, I think, is at least giving some folks some hope that maybe they are going to be on the rise. And so we'll see how that works out now. But the Thorns should be much fresher. You would expect them to be much sharper. And frankly, you would expect that this is another game that they're going to be able to put into the W column.
Right, and you would expect eventually Kristen Press will be back for Angel City.
Yep.
We don't really know an exact timeline at this point, but that's obviously a major addition when she's back, if she's healthy, if she's herself. But yeah, this Thorns team, they're just kind of chugging along right now. The question is, can they round into some really strong form so that they finish the next few months with the type of results that they want, right, leading into this World Cup. We've talked about it essentially every week, and so have the Thorns. Like, this stretch prior to the World Cup is incredibly crucial for them in terms of building up those points, and maybe eventually, if things go that way, putting a little bit of distance, a little bit of a cushion between themselves and the rest of the league. There's a lot of parity in NWSL. It's very hard to imagine a cushion being created out of this stretch, but if any team is capable in this league of doing that this year, I think it's definitely Portland. It's interesting. There are a number of players who played in this most recent match who aren't typically regular contributors. Reina Reyes starting was an interesting one, and I thought she was really solid at outside back. She's somebody that the team was excited about when they drafted her. She's somebody that she had a few, I'm a young player and I'm going to make some mistakes moments in this match. I think she got megged at one point, which was pretty rough, but it happens to everybody. It happens to the best defenders in the world. So, no shame in that moment, but she was solid. I think that, the entire back line has been something that, everybody rightfully focuses on Portland's ability to just score goals with the best of them in the world. And last year, obviously being the highest goal scoring team in the NWSL, but the way they defend, particularly in space, is a big reason why they're so great. And all the veterans they have along that back line, players like Kelly Hubley and Becky Sauerbrunn centrally, just holding it down. Klingenberg still doing what she does on the other side. I mean, it's an embarrassment of riches, as we say every week, and that area is definitely no different. And it showed itself against Louisville, a team that has been feisty all year, hasn't got
3 draws
no
coming
victory.
in, so it's not like this. This isn't an Orlando Pride situation where they're not competitive. They are competitive, and they are a competitive team. And I agree entirely. I think the Thorns defensively locking things down and then getting their noses in front early made this feel just not particularly dramatic, right? And it was sort of one of those games that even though the scoreline never got out of hand, it never felt particularly in doubt.
Right. And I think that has been the case in pretty much every match this season for Portland, with the exception of that Houston draw. But even then, that Houston draw was a product not of the Thorns having a bad game, but just not necessarily finishing. The green of the grass and the bounce of the ball, or however it was that Mike put it. But it's going to happen sometimes, and they're still undefeated. They're one of 3 teams in NWSL remaining undefeated at this point. I think that they'll potentially still be the only team undefeated at a certain point if they maintain their current form.
Well, that's true. If they continue to not lose games, presumably at some point other teams will lose games and they will be the only remaining undefeated team. I agree.
There you go. That's
they are not currently the only undefeated team, although they both. I think people would be surprised. It's not the others at the top of the table. It's 1 point down Washington, and then the Dash as well have not lost.
Yeah, I think the Dash
Draw City FC.
Underrated.
I think the Dash have sort of taken over Draw City FC status from Louisville now.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I think it's very clear that Portland, is going to be fine. I don't think that it's hard to talk about. It's hard to podcast about a team like this, I think, in some ways, because you get into these repetitive thought processes, these same cliches, these ideas that, yeah, they're good. Yeah, they're deep. Yeah, they're experienced. Yeah, they're in good form. Expanding on that is a challenge in some ways. And I think it's good to talk about individuals with this team, specifically one of the individuals who might not get a lot of shine, but she deserves it, is Bella Bixby. The players in front of her defend very well, but she also had a very nice game against Rossing. That's a player that makes all the difference. It'd be easy for the Thorns to be stacked everywhere else and just have a middle of the road goalkeeper, right? But I think Bixby is undoubtedly one of the top goalkeepers in NWSL and really in the world, if you think about, like, compared to the other starting goalkeepers in WSL and in the other leagues around the world, in France. I mean, she's up there. And if it weren't for the depth of the goalkeeper position on the U.S. women's national team, I feel like she'd be in the mix. you
Yeah,
know,
I
she's
think
a
that's
local
right.
person. Yeah,
Yeah.
she's a Portlander. So it's all very exciting to see what she's been able to do.
I think that's right, and it wouldn't surprise me if at some point she shows up sort of on the fringes of that discussion as well, in terms of the national team. But yeah, it's been a solid start to a season, which is, as she noted in sort of her post game walk off interview with the Thorns internal folks, is not just credit to her, but is credit to the team in front of her as well. They have done a really good job of keeping things pretty clean for Bella. And when Bella has been needed, she's been there. I think that one of the biggest questions for me, to pivot a little bit, but to talk about another individual, is sort of the sustainability of their usage of Christine Sinclair. Sink obviously scored the first goal. She's been really good for them in the first part of the season, frankly, better than she looked at really any time last year. It's been a little bit of a resurgence from Sink, which is both not shocking given Sink's unmatched professionalism, but also has been, I think, a pleasant surprise for Thorns fans so far. The question that I have is the extent to which that's going to be sustainable over the course of the entire season. That's not to question Sink's motivations even a little bit, because Sink strikes me as the kind of person who wants to win every single game she plays. And so it really is just a matter of whether her body can sort of sustain both this kind of effort in NWSL early in the season, going to the World Cup, where obviously she's going to put in, a very, very taxing effort for Canada, and then coming back and trying to finish out the season. I don't know. I wonder a little bit if maybe they should be saving saving a few, keeping a few pitches off that arm, in maybe rotating her out of the starting lineup periodically in some of these games. I mean, obviously it's a little bit of an odd time to talk about that, just given that rotation was the case for everybody this last week. But I do wonder if that's something that we should or might be seeing more of in the weeks going forward, to sort of try to make sure there's longevity to this uptick in production we've seen from Sink so far.
Yeah, I've had that question too. Like, she's playing heavier minutes than she did last year, and she didn't really have any nagging injury that we knew of last year. It was just kind of a product of the situation, and it made sense, right? She's almost 40 years old. She's been in the game as long as she has. It's normal for a player to have reduced minutes, to be in more of a super sub role, no matter their greatness at this age. But this year has kind of flipped that on its head, right? She's been a regular starter, playing heavy minutes, and rarely being rotated out of that lineup. I mean, that's good for her in terms of ramping up for the World Cup. Obviously, Canada is hoping she's fresh, she's able to play big minutes and do what she does for the national team as they pursue a World Cup title after that gold medal, which she was obviously brilliant in that gold medal run. A potential stopgap for any fatigue that might be lingering for Sink after this start to the regular season with the Thorns, and then after she's probably going to be pretty exhausted after the World Cup, is Lindsey Horan, right? I think that
absolutely
adding her into the midfield is a nice little, that's right, they have her situation, and she flawlessly jumps right into that role that Sink has been playing. She'll be tired too. Let's not mince words there. She's going to be tired after the World Cup because the U.S. is going to play deep into that tournament. But she's in her prime, and she, if she returns to Portland off her loan from Lyon, and given everything going on with Lyon right now, that seems ever more likely at this point than it ever did. We don't know what her thought process is in terms of her career, whether she might want to go somewhere other than Lyon or Portland once this loan expires, what their flexibility looks like in terms of her contract. But
the Thorns,
she is under contract.
And
exactly.
So, one of two things is going to happen. Either the Thorns are going to deal her rights for presumably a pretty hefty return, or they're going to get one of the, top 25 players in the world back after the World Cup.
Yeah, and so she'll be able to, if Sink needs that rest in the second half, which, that's going to probably be up to somebody other than her to decide, because she's such a competitor, right? She's going to want to be out there as much as she can, but it's about preserving what's great about her for the big games down the stretch and in the end of the season in the playoffs. Horan is right there, and nothing I have seen yet has led me to believe that she's not going to be in a Thorns uniform after this World Cup and back in Portland. She's got a lot of good friends here. She's been one of the all-time great Thorns, and it would be a great move for her to win first and foremost, to return to NWSL and contribute to a team that is very likely to win a championship when this thing is all said and done. She's had her experience in Europe. She proved that she could play over there and play well and be a major contributor twice. So it's exciting for Thorns fans, the prospect of that being the replacement for Sink, who has been really effective. And it hasn't been like a situation with Sink where she's played a ton of minutes and has not been impactful. She's been incredibly impactful and has proven why they need to play her. Maybe not need to, but have chosen to play her that many minutes.
The other question in the back of my mind, and this is, I think, tangentially related to the conversation about Sink, is what the Thorns are going to do sort of with the backup number 9 spot. I say it's tangentially related to Sink because Sink is at once both a possible option there. Obviously, she has scored a lot of goals from that position over the course of her career, so she knows how to do it. That wouldn't be a square peg in a round hole to draw on a John Spencerism. But I think that is sort of an obvious question going into the World Cup. I think Hannah Betfort had an opportunity to sort of seize that role and is probably in that role right now. I don't think she's quite seized it. I think she has some work yet to do, and it remains open. Is Morgan Weaver going to play more centrally during the World Cup period? And how are they going to manage that? I don't know. Weaver has been awfully productive, even at times dominant on the wing, and so I would be pretty reluctant to change that.
She's a pure winger.
Yeah,
I think Izzy DeQuilla is another name to add into that. She's somebody they believe can play high and center. I mean, she's got that ability. And
Adrienne Leon has done that as well at various points in her career, in coming off of what has been a very, very good first week in a Thorns uniform. I think that was, frankly, that was one of the bigger takeaways from this week, is that Adrienne Leon, I expected to be somebody who was going to come in and be kind of a depth piece. And she looks like she can be more than that. A real contributor to the team is how she looks. She would have had an assist, but for a handball call that I still haven't seen a convincing replay of, but was nonetheless, VAR used it to nullify what would have been Weaver's second goal. It would have been assisted, if my memory is serving me correctly, by Leon herself.
Yes, it would.
And overall, I think it's just been a very good week. She could also figure into that conversation without being too much of a fish out of water. But I think that's very much an open question. And obviously Leon wouldn't be in that conversation for the World Cup period, but even, before and after the World Cup period, that's somebody who's going to play, right? Your second number 9 is somebody who's going to play pretty regularly, and pretty regularly get between 10 and 30 minute shifts, just because of the nature of the beast and the desire, I think, especially in games that aren't super competitive, to keep some minutes off of Sophia Smith's legs. And I think that is an unresolved question for the Thorns. And we'll see who sort of steps up to take that. Maybe Betfort will round into a little bit stronger form. I don't think she's far off of it. But and sees that, or maybe it'll be somebody like DeQuilla. But I think that for me is maybe the biggest rotational question I have about this team right now, which is saying something, because we're not talking about a major hole in their starting 11. We're talking about who's their second number 9, which, like, compare that to the Timber side. We can name 5 strikers, but is anybody excited about any of them? So it's a very, very different conversation we're having on this side of things.
Yeah. If the biggest problem for your team is who's going to back up the MVP of the league, who regularly plays 90 minutes and has a ton of work rate and is just an amazing player.
Who, by the way, through 4 weeks is the prohibitive favorite to repeat as MVP of the league with 8 goal contributions in her first 4 games.
It's been insane. She's been on an even greater level.
Even more dominant than last year
already. And it doesn't even necessarily feel that way all the time, right? It feels like it's her contributions have been great. I'm not minimizing that in any way right now. 8 goal contributions with this many games, missing a couple games with US duty. It's incredible. She's had an incredible season so far, and you will find few people that are greater cheerleaders for Sophia Smith, even as a quote unquote objective journalist, than me. But even then, it feels like we could have seen more from her. Am I wrong? Like it could have been even more dominant. That's how great she is, despite the contributions that she's had in these first few games, and she's on pace for blowing last year's numbers out of the water. Even though last year's numbers were great and led to her winning the MVP award. It's going to be interesting how that ends up shaking out from a numbers standpoint with, the World Cup break, but regardless.
And the numbers the numbers could well end up being otherworldly, but just watching games, you can see how the numbers don't even tell the full story. Just the way it's Bo Jackson and Super Tecmo Bowl kind of stuff. The way she has the ability to single-handedly destroy defenses. That's why she has 4 assists, right? Because she now has developed the ability to destroy defenses and create things for her teammates, which, by the way, was the knock on her last year, was that she wasn't creating enough for her teammates. And now she is, because she just absolutely levels opposing defenses, and then her teammates feast on the tap-ins that come from that.
Yeah, and she draws so much attention that she has now realized, and this is part of the development of her game, and the fact that, by the way, folks, she is not at her peak yet. Yeah. She's 22 years old, so she's still learning on the field, and yet still so unbelievably dominant, right? She said in an interview this last week that she hates being called the future and doesn't like she's the present. I agree with that. She is absolutely the present, but she's also still developing. And this is a sign of that development, right? That she is able to go out there and distribute this way, find her teammates. And I think she's already got more assists. Correct me if I'm wrong, folks on the internet, now than she did all of last season. Yeah. Internet friends, which that's what you and me are, but now we're real life friends.
That's right. I think you're right, or in the neighborhood of right about that. And if you're in the neighborhood of right, good enough for me. But I think that's just exactly right. And the way that her game continues to evolve, it continues to grow and continues to evolve. I mean, we're just sort of at the mind bending, like what are the possibilities here point, because she's right that the present is superlatively good. And so that just makes you look, and then you look at the trajectory that she remains on, that she's still on. And it's just possibility bending in terms of what the future could possibly look like for Sophia Smith. But I mean, the important thing for the Thorns is that love is being shared. And that is her excellence is creating opportunities across the front line, and is making the Thorns just undefendable at times. So I think that is all very, very positive. But what happens when she's out? And I think we saw some continued good play against Louisville even after she left the game this last weekend. And I think that is a positive. I think we saw even some solid play from the Thorns at the Wave midweek in Challenge Cup. We even after Smith left the game, there were certainly a good number of opportunities for them to find an equalizer late in that game there, and they remained in fairly good control of the game even after Smith left. So I don't think it's going to be a bottom falls out kind of situation when Smith is not available for one reason or another, whether it's national team duty or just the reality of needing to manage minutes. But it nonetheless remains a question to be asked because they didn't find that equalizer in San Diego, right? Even though it was a game that I think they certainly had the better of, and the XG numbers heartily support that. By the way, as a note, I don't think we've had an opportunity to, maybe we did record after that last week, but I did just want to circle back to say that San Diego's XG numbers in that game were like pretty universally around the 0.2 range. Talking about the Thorns' defensive excellence, that's something else. That's a good team. And yes, they were rotating like the Thorns were. But on the road against San Diego, conceding about a quarter of an expected goal. And they got the bad end of that, right? The Wave nonetheless found one. That's something else. That's really, really good stuff.
Yeah, those stretches of defensive dominance that Portland has had this season, both in that game and then you think about there were stretches in the KC game too. KC are no slouches. They have a lot of talented players on the attack.
And now it seems like their coaching situation is getting better, and so they likely have some upside in terms of what we're going to see going forward rather than some of the rough periods that we've seen to date.
Yeah, I think that, that is only a positive for this team, even though obviously the instability can be a little scary, but there were 10, 15, 20-minute stretches sometimes in that match against KC where the Thorns were just inevitable. Anytime KC had the ball, it was not for very long. And when they did have it, it was thoroughly ineffective in a way that only a team that is in tremendous defensive shape could produce. Circling back to the Sophia Smith statistics, she does have more assists through 4 matches than she had in 20 matches last year. She's got 4 this year, 3 all of last year. Her stats last year: 15 goals, 3 assists, and that was good enough for MVP. 4 goals and 4 assists through 1/5 of the games so far is nuts. That's and she's liable to toss a couple more to her teammates are in the net on Saturday. So where does it end?
Yeah.
the teams that want to pick up some points are going to breathe a sigh of relief come the end of June once she heads off for US camp, because terrifying.
Player. And I feel like we're having these conversations in parallel, but it's kind of emblematic of what makes the Thorns so compelling at this point of the season. But turning back to the defensive point, and even back to that KC game, even when the game got away from them a bit at the beginning of the second half, how did they get control back? It was defensively. They got control of the game defensively, and then they used that to start opening up opportunities on the other end for Sophia Smith to go supernova. And so, I mean, there's an interrelationship between these two things too. But when they're able to defend well, and when they're forcing opponents to take risks, that only feeds into the production at the other end too. And so I think you've got to also give credit to both their integrity, their structural integrity as a unit, but the remarkable leadership that they have in their back six with players like Becky Sauerbrunn and Sam Coffey and the like. And so, I think that is all what feeds into, the feeling that this is another juggernaut Thorns team. And that's not to say that they don't have questions to answer still. They, of course, do. And that's not to say that there aren't ways that the season could go wrong. There are a million ways the season could go wrong because we're only 4 games in. But based on what we've seen so far, this is the team that was very, very good throughout 2022 and that won a title in 2022. And it just looks back and maybe even improved in 2023.
Yeah. In conclusion on this topic, as we wrap up the Thorns discussion.
In conclusion, what a transition.
They are better this year somehow than they were last year. Insane. A team that is not better than last year, at least so far, has been the Portland Timbers. They had a really nice result a couple Saturdays ago against Seattle. Momentum potentially could have shifted at that moment, and it kind of did, but it definitely did not result in points. It was a 2-1 loss for Portland in Cincinnati, a game that, if you watch it, you would think, oh, the Timbers were the better team. They had the better quality of chances. They looked like a real soccer team for the first time since that, other than that 20-minute stretch in the Seattle match. They looked good. They looked good. And then that match, and yet not finishing was the bugaboo, as it sometimes has been, as it often has been for this team the last 2 years. And they don't get the result. And they were really, really leaky defensively, especially centrally. Without Zuparich due to COVID, Mabiala seemed a bit over the hill. It seemed like it was somebody that it made sense that he had not registered a lot of minutes this season, because they just need somebody else at that spot. That's the whole reason why they were going hard for a striker at the transfer deadline. We'll talk more about that. They didn't get a deal done. Ned Grabavoy explained that in detail in a discussion that we had for a story on OregonLive.com. But it's a lot of the same issues that reared their heads, despite the fact that Portland seemed in much better form than they have been. Put together one of its more comprehensive offensive performances, despite just the one goal. I think there's plenty to be excited about in terms of how Evander is starting to look. There's been a lot of criticism. I've seen it, especially online, of him and his lack
internet
of
friends.
production.
How could you?
Yeah, how could the internet friends be so irrational? No, they haven't been necessarily irrational. They've just been emotional. That's sports. I get it to a degree, but also relax. It's sports. Potentially going to be okay. But yeah, people get the way they get about him and about other subjects. I get it to a degree. Give him some time though. And
yeah. I think
of
most
all the
folks are,
games,
to be honest.
yes.
I don't think anybody's
most
saying this
people are.
guy's he's a terrible player, total miss. What were they doing throwing $10 million away? I think folks are just saying he hasn't been great so far, which that's a reasonable summary of the facts.
That is correct. And I think that the team hasn't either. And
yeah, the team also hasn't either.
Yeah. But yeah, this game, when you look at it, when you think about the form they were in, what stands out?
If you strip away all the context and just look at this game, there's absolutely nothing to lose sleep over. There's frankly a good amount to like. Look, Cincinnati's a really good team. They're tied atop the Supporter Shield standings right now. Other than a literal tornado delayed selfie that they took at St. Louis, in which they conceded 5 goals in their other 7 games leading into this game against the Timbers, they'd conceded 4 goals and they'd scored 10, which isn't an amazing goal scoring record, but the results were all there. And this has been to date a really, really, really good Cincinnati team. So to go to Cincinnati to play as well as the Timbers did, and ultimately come out, on the losing side of a close game, in a competitive game, because games can be close without being competitive, but this was a close and competitive game, I think in its own right would cause nobody any stress. You could be a very good team. You could be a Supporter Shield level team and go get that result and not be that worried about it, because it's just hard to win away against really good teams. Hot takes. So I think when you strip away all of the context, this was a not troubling at all, and even in some ways encouraging performance. This wasn't the pillow fight against the Galaxy. It wasn't the capitulation in Atlanta. It wasn't the pillow fight against Sporting Kansas City, who, by the way, are just awful. Just a deeply terrible team, which I don't think I quite appreciated how absolutely pathetic SKC was after that first week. But they are just awful. The last team in MLS who has yet to record a win, and frankly, they don't look that close. Look, Montreal has 2 more wins than they do. For goodness sake. Montreal has 2 more wins than they do. I digress. But this wasn't any of those performances. This was by far the best 90 minutes the Timbers have put in all year. And, I mean, you can say, yes, the 20 minutes sort of at the tail end of the Sounders game was better. Yes, they scored 4 goals in 18 minutes. That, again, not a hot take. But in terms of an overall 90-minute sort of, start to finish, cradle to grave performance, this was markedly better than anything we've seen from the Timbers. They had plenty of dangerous moments. They were more decisive in the attack than they've been. They used width better than they have. They were just more coherent in the attack than they've been. And so there was a ton of that to like. But they ran back into a seeming brick wall that really has persisted since last year, in which, for all of the good moments that they created, for all of the moments in which they were dangerous and looked threatening to Cincinnati, they lacked the personnel to turn those into really ripe goal scoring chances. There still weren't a ton. For all of the good moments the Timbers had, there still weren't a ton of great chances. David Ayala should have buried a diving header at the end of the first half that would have leveled things going into the locker room. Yes, that's probably the best chance that they missed. But it's not like this was, a matter of a bunch of really clear goal scoring chances that just went awry. It was mostly a matter of
headers. Yeah, there was a few headers that, including Ayala's, that people will stick on. But at the same time, some of those headers came in situations that were very difficult angles, that were not super clear chances that, it'd be hard to put pace on them. It wasn't like they had like 5 different opportunities where you're like, that's got to be a goal. There were maybe 1 or 2.
Yeah, I agree. And so the bigger concern for this Timbers team, for me, remains not necessarily finishing off chances, although I do have concerns about that. But I think there's the sort of precedent concern of whether they can even ripen dangerous moments into chances. And I think that was a bit of a problem in Cincinnati. And again, if you strip away all the context, I wouldn't be concerned about that at all, because Cincinnati is a solid defensive team. They're a very good team overall. On the road, fine. There's nothing really to be concerned about if you strip away all the context. But when you bring the context back, that actually is a continuation for all of the things that were much better in this game. That is a continuation of a problem that's been around for a while. And frankly, that looks like it might stick around for a while. Or shall I say, frankly, looks like it might stick around for a while. Because, a big part of that in this game was I didn't think Frank Boley was very good. I didn't think he was impactful. For all of the dangerous moments that they had, it's not like he was constantly a threat to be on the end of them. It's not like he was constantly a threat to score a goal. And it just brings me back to the point that we've made over and over and over again, which is that it seems like at the striker position, the Timbers are just doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result, bringing in similar profile players at a similar price point. And it just hasn't been working so far. And Boley could very well still be in his acclimation period. Not throwing dirt on him and his future by any means, but he hasn't showed it other than his remarkable first impression in Dallas to save a point. I don't think he showed so far the ability to be a difference maker. I think it is very fair to point out that Evander looked much better and much more dangerous and was at the heart of many more of those dangerous moments than he has been in the past. That's exciting. That's a very good sign for the Timbers. But even
as well. Yeah.
Well, he's been the one consistently dangerous guy all year.
Yeah.
And I think he showed that he can be very dangerous within that structure even. And so those are all encouraging things, but I still have concerns about, even notwithstanding how many good moments that they're able to create through Evander or through Mosquera, whether they have the personnel to be able to consistently turn those moments into goal scoring opportunities and ultimately goals. I haven't seen it so far, and it's a long-standing problem, and it very much was an issue in Cincinnati. I agree with you entirely defensively. I think they have they have 2 MLS starting level center backs and then a pretty significant drop off. And that leads into the obvious next topic of conversation, which is that the transfer window closed. And at center back, the Timbers signed nobody. Which I don't even think in your interview, Ned put much lipstick on this pig. That was a failure. They wanted to, right? They were trying to. They wanted to.
Yeah, and Gio even last night added a little more depth to it in that they thought it was going to happen. He used the word promise and then he corrected himself and said possibility. But it seems like they had somebody that they really felt good about getting it over the line before the deadline, and then the complications of making an international signing get in the way. Maybe an agent asks for one thing and that's a last minute ask and they can't make it, or something with his current club gets in the way.
And it's
we don't know.
This is just a complicated time to take a guy out of a current club, right? Because most of them are within a month or 6 weeks of the end of their season. A lot of them are striving for something, trying to get something in those last 6 weeks. And so depending on where they are competitively, a lot of times it's difficult to be able to get a guy. You don't want to pay a bunch of money, right? Especially if a player is going to be out of contract over the summer, you don't want to pay a bunch of money to get him for a couple extra months. So your threshold, your pain tolerance for being able to pay a transfer fee is going to be pretty low. But very often clubs are like, heck no, I'm not going to get rid of that guy now. I mean, how would you feel if the Timbers in the middle of September got rid of an important player while they were trying to climb their way up the playoff standings? Not good. And that's exactly how those clubs feel in a moment like this, which by the way, this is why teams often don't try not to leave their important business for the very end of the transfer window. Because it's easier to make a deal in January than it is in April. Because in January, those clubs can go out and make a corresponding move to replace them. Or they at least have some runway to be able to bring in whoever the successor is and get them established before sort of the stretch run. This is just a hard time to do business with players under contract. And most of the players you want are going to be under contract and playing and contributing for teams that have something to play for. And so it's just a hard time to do that business. And this goes back to what is the point that I made a few times here, but I think is an important point, which is this was a really important offseason for the Timbers. There were clearly some issues between the roster and the locker room and Gio at the end of last year that required some personnel turnover in order to be better this year. Just running everybody back, if you went back to October, didn't seem like a particularly viable or a particularly wise approach, which is why back last October, whenever anybody from the Timbers front office was talking to a journalist, they would say, this is going to be an active offseason for us. We're going to go out and you know, we're going to be active this year, this winter. And they belly flopped. And I think it's impossible not to look at the fact that last week they finally hired the person who effectively backfilled Ned Grabovoy's old job. And that for 6 months, more than 6 months, they've basically been asking Ned to do Gavin Wilkinson's old job and Ned's old job. This isn't a big office. It's like 3 or 4 people. And so when you look back at this ostensibly active offseason that turned out not to be active, the only major signing they made was the one that had been in the works for months leading into this transfer window. And you ask yourself why that happened. You've got to look at that. that they were, I mean, if you have 4 people in an office and you only have If you're supposed to have 4 and you only have 3, that's going to very significantly affect your ability to get things done. And especially
it's the same.
It's especially true given that the person that they didn't hire is the primary person who's going to be going out and doing that in-person scouting. I don't know if folks sort of recognize this, but over the last few years when Gavin Wilkinson was GM and Ned was technical director, I would bet pretty strongly that Ned was getting significantly more frequent flyer miles than Gavin was. And basically Ned is the guy who they didn't hire until last week. And so, yeah, that's going to really significantly impact your ability to go out and have this so-called active transfer window that you want to have. And that isn't to let Ned entirely off the hook. Obviously, they had ambitions for doing things and they missed. But I also think it's fair to say that he was set up for failure. And I think you've just got to look at the club leadership on that point. Why did it take 3 months after Gavin Wilkinson was fired to fully promote Ned which is really sort of something, the thing that is necessary to allow him to go and build out the rest of his team? Because nobody's going to try to apply for a number 2 job with a number 1 who might be gone in like a few weeks, right? They can't hire a technical director until he is given the GM job, as a practical matter or as a formal matter. Why did that take 3 months? I haven't seen any explanation, let alone a compelling one, and I doubt there is one. That should have been something that should have been done within a matter of a few weeks, if they were serious about this being an active offseason. Because you need to build out that team and repair your leadership structure if you want to be able to get those things done. And they just didn't do it. Club leadership dropped the ball, and they set Grabavoy up for failure in this window by doing that. And then he, in fact, failed. Which maybe part of that is on him, and that very well may be the case. But when you set somebody up for failure, you can't just point at them when they fail. Like, that is a bigger organizational problem.
And it's easy too to if you are in that organization and you have done this and that you kind of set Ned up for failure. It's easy to point to Evander and say, but hey, look at this. And I'm not saying that the organization has done that. I haven't heard that, but that would be an easy out, right? Is to say, oh, look, we made a big $10 million sign.
That signing was on the 5-yard line before all this went down, though.
It was, yeah. Gavin did all the work with Ned for that long before any of this stuff went down. And look, the Timbers on the field played with a not full deck of cards, as we have described it, for the better part of the start of this season. And boy, did it show. And they talked about it, and Gio didn't use it as an excuse necessarily, but he vocalized it. And I understand the lack of desire to vocalize that on Ned's part. He's not going to come out and say, yeah, Merritt Paulson set me up for failure. That's never going to happen.
Right.
That's his boss, man. Like that, regardless of organizational structure and the fact that Merritt has stepped away as president of business, that type of criticism is not going to happen. But yeah, he was playing multiple people down in the situation, and whatever remnants of what Gavin had set up, it's not like Gavin gave him a cheat sheet when he was fired. It's not like Gavin transferred all his contacts over. Yes, Ned played a crucial role before this, but for the last decade plus of Timbers soccer, Gavin Wilkinson, for all the hatred that the fan base has for him and for all the criticism he has faced for very clear and obvious public mistakes that he has made, he was very, very important to the soccer aspect of this organization. And him not being there makes it more difficult for Ned Grabavoy. These are all not excuses. I know you're not making excuses. I'm not making excuses for what Ned himself has described as failure. But it's got to be in people's minds, right? And they're in still in pursuit of the same center back. They have the idea in their head that they're going to wrap it up before or right leading up to the summer transfer window, get it done early, try and get him in here as soon as possible. That would be great, but you're still going to play multiple months and like 13 regular season matches with your current roster, your current rotation of center backs. Now, maybe, Tyler Clegg gets an opportunity as another center back to come in. He scored a goal last night in that Open Cup match.
It had a nice game.
And Gio praised him. What we do know, and this podcast is being recorded before this news drops, but I know about it, so I'm going to talk about it, and it'll be dropped by the
insider
time this podcast
information
comes out.
Internet friends, if you had been listening when this was said, you would have had insider information. As it is, now you just have public information. So
if this was one of the live podcasts, then people would be knowing something they shouldn't know. But you should know this. It's already out by the time you're hearing my voice.
Also, just to like prepare people, because the buildup here has perhaps been slightly overblown. This is not going to shock you. If you are standing up, you may remain standing because you will not involuntarily collapse to the ground.
If you're in your car, don't pull over. Noel Caliscan is going to be signed to the first team. That's happening today, and that's
oh my gosh! Are you kidding me?
That's good. I am happy for Noel. I'm happy for the team to add another midfielder without Eric Williamson. I think that it's a welcome addition, but it doesn't solve the center back problem. It's not the signing everybody wants. There is more to be done, and Ned talked about it more in my interview with him, and folks can go read that on Oregon Live. But they have other ambitions. They want to sign a DP. They want to sign a young DP as well on top of a center back. These are, we've heard this before, right? Like we heard it several months ago. The exact same ambition, but several months ago, and the can obviously keeps getting kicked down the road, and fans are upset. Fans are impatient, and rightfully so. And I would imagine that behind the scenes, like Gio and Ned
is also impatient.
Yeah, the table is impatient because Gio doesn't have, the personnel that he might want to really succeed. And that's not to take anything away from the guys that are here, but this is a Timbers team in transition. There are guys that are over the hill. There are guys that were great for this club that are not the same player anymore. There are young guys that have either not panned out or are unproven and are not yet regular, positive, solid contributors for the team. And they have to make moves in order to compete in MLS. They're currently outside of the playoff picture in an era where pretty much everybody is inside the playoff picture, save for the wooden spoon contenders, right?
That's right.
So they're 1 point out, but they are markedly and visibly worse than the teams above them.
Also, by the way, miss me with the hey, we got 9th.
Yeah, I know you hate that. It ain't shoot, as you said.
That ain't
right?
shoot at all.
It ain't. And Gio knows it ain't either. Like, even if they make the postseason, which is a strong possibility given the amount of teams that get in,
it's just mathematically, it is a strong possibility.
Yeah, like Gio's not going to be satisfied if they get that 9 seed and they just get bounced, or if they get that seed or the 8 seed, they win that first game, but then LAFC trounces them. He doesn't want that. The players, most of them, I don't think, are satisfied with that result, and I don't think the organization should either. I think that we've talked previously about the potential for there being a backslide that is happening or has already happened for the Timbers in terms of their standing and their station in MLS, and continuing to not get these deals over the line, make the moves they need to make. It accelerates that backslide. They're in the middle tier. There are teams that have come into the league in the last 5 years that have already surpassed the Timbers in terms of their station in MLS. LAFC is obviously the most obvious one, but there are other teams, Seattle, that have put a little distance between themselves and Portland, and that pisses fans off. There are a few more passionate fan bases in American soccer than Portland Timbers fans, and they have not had a lot to cheer for the last 2 years, both in terms of the very obvious and far more important off-field issues, but also the product on the field for the Timbers is not living up to the standard set by this club many years ago when, they were the class of MLS. They were what is possible with this league in developing something that fans can be proud of.
And, I think Ned's comments to you about having flexibility both for the summer and for the subsequent winter transfer window are well taken. He's right. Both in terms of they have a bunch of expiring contracts coming up at the end of the year this year. And they also have some shorter term flexibility, both in terms of existing cap space, since they didn't use it, but also in terms of their ability to get some contracts off the books through the amnesty provision this year, before the summer transfer window, and potentially even with the season-ending injury designation. And so, those comments are well taken, but I think any reasonable person now, looking back at the last 6+ months, would have to say, okay, well, it's great to have that flexibility, but does the club have the willingness to spend the financial resources that would be necessary to take advantage of that flexibility? And even if they do have that willingness to spend the money, do they have the aptitude to go out and get these significant signings across the line? Now, maybe the sort of filling out the front office now, which just happened in the last week, will help them do that. I think that is very much the hope. And if you want to hang your hat on something to say they will have more aptitude to go out and get these things done, that's a good part of it. But it's not like this is a front office now with a proven track record of being able to get these signings done. Because essentially what they did is they got a nearly done signing across the line in Evander. They brought in a short-term flyer at number 9 in Frank Bully, and we'll see how that turns out. But early returns have been pretty milquetoast. And then they failed to get all the other business that they needed to get done. And so I think there's a reasonable amount of guardedness about whether they do have that ability to go out and use that flexibility to turn it into additions that will get the team back up to the standard that it's set for itself. And we'll see. The pressure is now more squarely on Ned. I don't think he can rely on or I don't think people can reasonably point to he was set up to fail points going forward. But they need to be able to go out and do it now. And so, they didn't last time around. There may have been reasons for that, but for whether there are reasons or not now, they need to do it, because if they don't, if they have another window or two like this last one in which they fail to get their business done, it's only going to keep going downhill, and it's pretty downhill already.
A nice positive to wrap the podcast was a little victory last night for the Timbers in the U.S. Open Cup. Heavily rotated lineup, 3-1 over Orange County SC. They will move on. The selection process is happening after we record this podcast, so we can't necessarily talk about the next opponent. But a really, really compelling and I think positive storyline out of that Open Cup match, which not much to be gleaned from that in terms of the team's form, in terms of its direction, whatever. It's a bunch of dudes that don't normally play a lot, including T2 guys. Caliscan showed well, and I think is somebody that will be competing for minutes in the defensive midfield with David Ayala, with Christian Paredes as the season goes on, because those two plus Diego Chara is all they got right now. And I really don't think Ayala is a natural defensive midfielder anyway, but that's another conversation.
I think he can but he's got some development to do.
He's got a lot of development to do, but the more compelling storyline from that game was obviously the return of Sebastian Blanco. 34-ish minutes. He was slated for 25 to 30. He played a little more. Moving pretty well, better than it seemed like he was moving at training in the weeks leading up to it. Still fiery, still playing at the speed that he likes to play. Had a slide tackle that was like uncompetitive, and you and I were laughing about it at halftime. And after the game, he's like, "Yeah, I just wanted to add a little spice to the game," and everybody, of course, cracked up in the press room. That's Seba. That's quintessential Sebastian Blanco. But a really great story, and I think that Seba should be commended for his stick-to-itiveness, if you will, his resilience to come back, because that dude was running sprints 4 or 5 weeks ago, and his leg was so stiff that he could barely walk. And all of last year, and we've talked about this over and over again, couldn't play with his kids, couldn't go up the stairs, serious knee pain that was debilitating in his regular life, and probably will be debilitating for the rest of his life because he chose to be an athlete, and knees are what they are. We're a couple of guys that are starting to get longer in the tooth than we might have been. maybe you more so than me, but so we know about that. But Seba's resilience, incredibly inspiring, and a testament to his character, to what he means to the club. And if this is the last year for him, which it very well could be, given the severity of that chronic knee pain, given that ramping up for a whole nother season seems like a pretty tall task for him after the ramp up it took to get to this point. I would love to see him go out on a high note and be a consistent positive contributor, be somebody that comes off the bench, plays 20, 25 minutes and ignites them when they need it in a game that they might be stale. And he's a good guy. Seba's a good guy and a beloved person in his community. So I am personally happy for him from last night.
Yeah, it was good to see him back on the field. And, I mean, as we've talked about before, he has sort of earned the right to be able to go out on his terms. And if he wants to keep working his way back, then he should be given the ability to do that until he can't. And so it was nice to see him back out on the field. I thought his 30 minute appearance looked exactly like you'd expect it to look. He just hasn't played in a while. He obviously is still working through some physical stuff, and there's still some ramp up there to do. And I think you saw some of that, but he also had some nice moments. And so, I think it was about what you would have expected. The most important thing was just that he got out and he got 30 minutes under his legs. And hopefully that can be a springboard to something more positive. But I think that all remains to be seen. And so sort of the expectations level setting that I think should be done is that this is going to be just kind of we're going to see how it goes sort of situation. It's obviously one thing to be able to handle playing physically. It's also going to be another thing to be able to handle playing against better competition. That was not obviously an MLS level talented Orange County team that the Timbers played last night. And so that competition was moving at a different speed than St. Louis City will, or any of the Timbers' next opponents will. And so whether he'll be able to be effective is another question, not just whether he'll be able to be healthy, but effective against that higher level of competition. I think that all remains to be seen. So we'll see how it goes. I would like nothing more than for it to go well. I would like to be able to see Seba in what is likely his last season kind of be able to ride off into the sunset and have some special moments to cap off what has been a special career with his club and a special career overall. But we're just going to have to see how that plays out as it plays out.
And one more piece of injury news, or a pair of pieces, I guess, is that Jimmy Chara is coming back for the Timbers in terms of availability on Saturday. The question is whether or not he will see the field. He didn't in the U.S. Open Cup match, but they figured with his contribution and his importance to the team in terms of its regular season hopes, probably better to wait for him to potentially make his debut against St. Louis on Saturday. That one's at 5:30. On Apple TV app for free. I think it's one of the last free ones of the season in terms of not requiring MLS season pass to watch them. So
the free stuff always comes early.
The free stuff is probably running out here. And Claudio Bravo has been out. Rasmussen played some pretty heavy minutes at outside back, but in the U.S. Open Cup, but he's probably slated for some more because from my understanding, Bravo is probably not going to play on Saturday against St. Louis. He's got a calf injury that he was about 50-50 on playing last week. We don't quite yet know the severity of that. Gio has not talked about that. I did not get a chance to ask him last night, although I did promise some people on the internet I was going to ask him. I didn't. I asked him about
just
some
letting down your internet friends left and right.
That's all I ever do. And so that remains to be seen going into that game. I would not expect Bravo to play. But a pivotal one. St. Louis has been in great form. They've been one of the best teams in MLS this season as an expansion side. Exciting for them, but a little scary for the Timbers, right? Because you come off that game where you feel like you played very well. You want to get the 3 points or even pull a point out of this St. Louis match to feel like you're actually starting to turn a corner rather than feeling like you're gonna and then you don't turn the corner. So we'll see how that one goes.
Yeah, it's an important one. One important note, I think, on the St. Louis side is no Joao Klaus, their number 9, who was pretty good in that game in Portland and has been pretty good for them. He's going to be out, looks like, for a couple of weeks, so certainly for this game against the Timbers. And this is always one of the big questions with expansion teams. You see expansion teams who sort of have and are able to put together a solid and competitive 11. Obviously, they've been more than competitive. They've been very good. But very often there's a real lack of depth. Just sort of in the nature of having to build a roster. And so when they start to lose key pieces, as every team just does over the course of a year with injuries and the like, how is that going to go? How are they going to be able to manage those things? And I think we're going to find out a little bit. Klaus has been huge for them. And I think we're going to find out a little bit about how they're going to be able to manage that absence. But look, this is a difficult game for the Timbers. In some ways, it's a little bit of a game in which the Timbers would be happy with anything they can take out of it, just given the team's respective forms heading into this. But looking forward, I think the month of May is basically going to decide whether this is a Timbers team that's going to be able to make a bit more of a run through the summer and into the fall, or if this is going to be a hard slog. They have 5 games in May, 3 at home. All of them are against lower half Western Conference opponents. So those are the teams with whom the Timbers are most directly competing in the table right now, first of all, but they're also all winnable games. These are all flawed teams that the Timbers are going to see in May. And so looking ahead at that stretch, I think that's a month, frankly, in the 5 games where the Timbers should be looking to take double-digit points. And if you're sitting here saying, hey, the Timbers don't even have double-digit points yet in almost twice as many games, you are correct, first of all, and that is a reasonable basis for skepticism as to whether they can get the work done in this next stretch that they can or that they need to. But nonetheless, I think that's sort of about where they're going to need to be in order to be in the position that they need to be in when the schedule gets more difficult as they get into the summer. So I think these next 6 weeks or so are going to be huge for the Timbers, absolutely enormous, and are going to determine whether this is going to be a team that's going to have the ability to shoot this year or not. And it would be helpful in the stretch to have some reinforcements, but they do not. And so they go with the team they have.
Pressing on. That'll wrap it for us on Soccer Made in Portland for this week. We'll be back next week to talk Timbers and Thorns. And whatever else pops up in our wonderful little lives. I will leave you with a positive note outside of the soccer world. There's a beautiful little bird's nest outside of myself and Emma Knight's house here in Beaverton. It's some chickadees. We identified them as black-capped chickadee eggs. There are 4 of them, really tiny, really cute. I scared the mom this morning trying to look into the nest. She flew off. Hopefully she comes back to her eggs and I haven't doomed them, but that's a positive.
That is real potential negative on this this what started as a nice heartwarming moment. It's like, well, did Ryan kill a bunch of baby birds? Tune in next week.
I did not. They're okay. It'll be okay. I'm keeping that positive energy in the world. The mom just flew off for a second. She'll be back. It's her babies. She's gonna keep them safe. And if you've got any baby names for the unhatched little birdies, submit them to us on Twitter at SoccerMaidenPDX, at Ryan T. Clark, and at Chris Reifer. We will welcome any and all bird name suggestions. Jill Farley over at PTFC suggested last night that we, name them after Thorns and Timbers people when and if they hatch. So depending on the number that hatch, that'll maybe be the approach.
Exclusively Diego and Sink. That's okay. They're all just named that.
Just two Diegos and 2 Sinks. Okay, that's fine. Sounds good. Yep. Follow us on Twitter at those handles. Make sure to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Review us if you wish. Any suggestions you may have for some segments you wanna hear next week, we're happy to mix it up from the regular formula. And always, thank you for listening. We'll be back with you next week.